a young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
More than 120 million people worldwide have been forced from their homes, the highest number ever recorded according to UNHCR's latest Global Trends report. Humanitarian needs continue to rise, funding is under stress, and challenges such as climate change and technological disruption are reshaping societies worldwide. Against this backdrop, displacement is no longer a humanitarian issue. It is increasingly an economic and social and global governance issue. Can they discuss also the need to empower and help these individuals who have been forcibly forced from their homes? And what role can government, businesses, and new technologies play in creating opportunities to people in need? Joining us today is Raouf Mazou, Assistant High Commissioner for Operations at UNHCR. Commissioner Mazou, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
As was highlighted by Global Trends report commissioned by UNHCR, unfolding right in front of our eyes. Tell us, please, more about the most notable trends in this Global Trends report.
So the trend, the first thing to say is the numbers. The numbers remain very high. 117 million people, refugees and internally displaced persons, still a very high number. And we've seen over the past 10 years, these high numbers. The first thing, for the first time, we're seeing a decrease in the number of refugees and the number of forcibly displaced persons. So that's the big news. But we have to take that with some caution. The first caution is the fact that we know that there are refugees who are going back to their country in difficult circumstances. It's the case of Sudanese who are going back when the conflict is still taking place. It's the case of Afghans who are going back in difficult circumstances, and it's the fact of other refugee populations around the world. But you also have the Syrian refugee situation, which has been one of the biggest refugee situations that we had, which is now, as a result of an improvement of the situation in the country, allowing people to go back. And this is also one of the large number of return that have been reported, and which is reflected by a reduction.
I mean, given the war in Ukraine, the crisis in Gaza, fragile peace deal between Iran and the US and Israel, there's still an absolute decrease when it comes to the sheer number of refugees.
There is a decrease, but we have to know that a decrease today can be an increase a few days later. If you take, for instance, and the numbers that we provided were the numbers end of 2025. If you take the Iranian situation, there was an estimate of about 3.2 million people internally displaced as a result of the current situation. Now, with and the improvement of the situation, you're probably likely to have people going back. But these are numbers that are going up and down, and which we normally fix at a certain point so that we can communicate about it. So the numbers that we're talking about are end of 2025.
Okay, 117 million people, 1 in every 70 people, your fellow human beings, are displaced.
Yeah.
Think about this, and this is a very dire situation.
No, it is, and it requires, and it's important as you did to put that in perspective for people to understand and see what it means. And it underlines the importance of solutions to problems, solutions to refugee crisis. And the solution in most cases is peace. If you take the situation in Ukraine, if you take the situation in Sudan, if you take the situation in Syria, it is peace that allows people to go back. That's one. And then even once peace is realized, we need to have the resources necessary to rebuild the places that people have had to flee. Because after a long absence and fighting, it's clear that most of the places from where people are living need to be reconstructed, and that's extremely expensive. I'm sure you've heard some of the amounts that have been mentioned in relation to Gaza or other places. It's extremely expensive, but it requires the support of the international community. So peace is one important thing, and then you have to mobilize the resources that are necessary for people to be able to go back and resume their normal lives.
When it comes to helping resolve on the state of refugees from where you are?
There is a realization that with the numbers that you've mentioned, 1 in every 70 people, there is no way you can think of economic development if you do not address the issue of forced displacement. There is an understanding of the fact that if you want the world to thrive, if you want the world to evolve positively, the issue of forced displacement has to be resolved, prevented, better managed, and resolved.
When it comes to how AI is aiding wars and making things worse for the vulnerable population, making them internally displaced. Are you talking about the use of AI in wars?
It is clear that it is, and we've seen that it is displacing population. So there has to be consciousness of that. There has to be consciousness of the fact that AI can be used for good, but AI can also be used in a manner that has a consequence for populations around the world. The war is one, but at the same time, AI can be used to provide better health care. Specialists will tell you that. AI can be used to provide education at lower cost to populations that are in remote location. AI can help better managing data for refugees. We know who is where and who needs what much faster, to analyze the data much faster. So what we're saying is these innovations have to take into consideration the situation of the most needy population and have to be used to address the needs of some of them.
Can you give us an example of how AI is being applied to help the daily lives of those displaced anywhere in the world?
I would say the use of data, and more specifically in a number of refugee contexts, the call centers that are put in place for refugees to be able to call ourselves or our partners for protection. AI helps you identify much faster the needs of the people who are calling, helps direct the person who is in need much faster to the person who is going to respond to the need. So the mix between use of data, telecommunication, and the need to have somebody who can respond quickly to a protection requirement of a refugee, it is AI which actually helps us do that.
Focus on what's relevant in China and the world. Bridge the gap between what you know and what you want to know. This is The Hub.
A tale of love, peace, and friendship.
Dear Grandpatry, I wish that we could stay friends forever. Me, Dashan, and Haiyan.
Friends forever!
Friends forever.
Based on real events, Echoes of Kuliang, a radio drama series, relates the warm and vibrant life stories of the Kuliang friends set in the historical tapestry of the 20th century.
Match!
We'll gather the balls for you!
Let's see if we can catch some big fish and ask my mom to make some fishbowl soup tonight. Do you guys know what I can do?
Bình bình an an,平安平安 symbolizing being safe.
床前明月光，疑是地上霜。举头望明月，on my bed 思故乡。
With spellbinding performances and immersive sound effects, CGTN Radio presents you Echoes of Kuliang, available on radio.cgtn.com and all major podcast platforms.
Such a beautiful story.
Follow Echoes of Kuliang as it unfolds across generations, bridging continents and cultures in a celebration of love, friendship, and the enduring spirit of home.
Hometown.
How far we apart, Kuliang, where we call it home.
There's an argument going around saying that the refugees displaced can be actually net contributors to a country's or society's economy instead of being pure liability that has been perceived as such previously. Tell us about that, please.
So we've seen that in context, and it has actually been measured. I can think of Colombia, for instance. I can think of Brazil, for instance, where refugees have been clearly net contributors to the economy of the country which has received them. It has been measured, and these are clear examples.
How have they been incorporated into the society?
Through jobs. If I take, for instance, the refugees arriving in Mexico, you have about 50,000 of them who've been provided with jobs.
From other Central American states?
From other Central American states, and being provided with jobs, and that has been a way that they've been incorporated in the society. If I take Latin America, it's primarily through jobs. And it has been clearly demonstrated through assessment and research that they have been a net contribution to the economy of the country that has received them. Venezuelans arriving in Brazil, for instance, net contribution to the economy. Venezuelans arriving in Colombia, net contribution to the economy, and it has actually been.
Mostly in the gig economy sector or informal sectors of the economy?
In all sectors. So the difference there is that it was not in the informal sector, it was in the formal sector. Because in both countries, refugees have the right to work. And because they have the right to work, they are officially working and they officially contribute to the social protection scheme of the country that is receiving them. And that's how you can see that because they are working and because they are contributing, they are not costing to the society which is welcoming them, but they are actually contributing. And in a number of other cases, there's been a study, for instance, done in Poland on the impact of the presence of refugees from Ukraine. And there too, there was a clear demonstration of the fact that the presence of the refugees has actually contributed to the economy. That, of course, needs to be done in a context where, as you said, it's not informal jobs, it's formal jobs. You can actually measure how they are contributing to the economy. When it is informal, you have, for instance, Afghan refugees in Iran or in Pakistan, often working in the informal economy. The difficulty of having refugees working in the informal economy is that they cannot pay the social taxes that anybody who works should pay. And these social taxes then contribute to social protection schemes. And because they don't contribute to social protection schemes, which give education, healthcare, etc., then you have populations saying, but these refugees are benefiting from social protection, but they are not contributing. If they are in the informal sector, you cannot make them contribute. If they are in the formal sector, and if they are registered as workers, then they can contribute to the economy, to the social protection, and you can actually measure that. So that's why we've been encouraging countries actually allow officially refugees to work. That also requires support from the international community because countries should not be left on their own to provide protection and assistance to refugees simply because they are neighbors to the country which is going through a crisis. The rest of the world should contribute to that and share the burden. And that's what we've been advocating for.
That would take presumably a lot of action and will from the policymakers and politicians worldwide when protectionism and nationalism have been on the rise in many parts of the world. What can private companies do when it comes to helping resolve the refugee crisis?
A number of things. First, private sector companies can provide assistance through philanthropy, as they've done. As an organization, we have received globally from the private sector, and we've had a number of companies, including here in China, which have been very, very active in providing assistance to refugees around the world. Solar companies, for instance, which have been very, very active. There's a company, Transsion also, which is in telecom, which has also been very, very active and providing support. There is a company dealing with sports, ENTA, which has also been very, very active. So many companies in China which are providing support. What we are saying also, and where we are trying to go a step further, is to encourage businesses to invest in places where refugees are or internally displaced persons are. For instance, in the northern part of Nigeria, we've encouraged a number of companies in the agribusiness to invest in parts where you have a large number of internally displaced persons, and that provides them with jobs. And I made reference earlier to Brazil, where you have about 250,000 refugees who have jobs. So these are the ways. Philanthropy, which is what we've traditionally done, but also being part of the response, and being part of the response by providing job, which reduces the dependency to humanitarian assistance. And that's the best support that you can provide to a refugee, is to give a job.
Now, how do you look at China's efforts when it comes to its contribution to UNHCR and helping resolve the refugee crisis on a regional and global level?
So China is an extremely important member of the Security Council, permanent member of the Security country, which believes strongly in multilateralism, a country which has had peacekeeping troops in various places around the world. I remember South Sudan, for instance, being a place where China had a presence. What we are now hoping is that when it comes to financial contributions, we'll be able to increase. We believe that with the strength of the private sector of China, we should be able to increase these numbers because we do need the financial assistance. We also want to collaborate very much with China on the bilateral cooperation that they have with a number of countries which are receiving a large number of refugees. So if you have, for instance, China having a collaboration with, let's say, Uganda or South Sudan or Afghanistan, as I've seen, to see how through the bilateral cooperation that China has with these countries, we can also take into consideration the burden that these countries have with refugees, Uganda, for instance, or with returnees, Afghanistan. So to better link the economic interest that China has in a given country with the need for that government to deal with refugees or returnees.
1, 2, 3, 7. Mom, were there 7?
Yes, darling. There were 7 bombs.
Mom, can I sleep now?
Yes. Tonight, there were only 7.
More than 3 million people are now temporarily displaced.
About 35% of the displaced are children, are terrified about being caught up in these attacks.
1 apple, 2 monkeys, 3 elephants, 4 dogs, 5 stars.
Most children learn to count with the nice things in life, but some have to count to the sound of the world in ruins.
Sweet dreams, honey. Tomorrow, we count something else.
Children will learn no matter what. But the question is, will the grown-ups?
China has been arguing that through development comes peace and prosperity. Through development comes jobs and a sense of security. And that's why our President Xi proposed this Global Development Initiative, along with 3 other initiatives addressing issues at its core, according to the Chinese philosophy. How do you look at this Chinese approach?
No, I think that's the right approach, and this is what we have been advocating for. The point I made earlier, to focus on self-reliance of refugee population rather than continuous humanitarian assistance, is very much in that philosophy. You You use development resources to make sure that you reduce the dependency to humanitarian assistance and get somebody to become self-reliant. That's the type of vision. So development response at the end of the day is the best one. It's important that we have clear objectives when we talk about development response. And when we say, for instance, as UNHCR, our objective is to reduce by 50% the number of refugees depending on humanitarian assistance by 2035, there is a clear development objective that we put on the table. And we believe that this is how we can actually resolve issue and prevent further displacement.
When it comes to displaced people, they can be faceless people. To the UNHCR, it can be an overgeneralized agency out there. Can you put a face on this agency and on the work that you do, especially the people that you're helping? Help us understand the plight of an average refugee. What is she or he like?
So you said something very important. You spoke of internally displaced persons. We often speak of refugees, but the number of people who are internally displaced as a result of conflict in their own country is even higher than we're talking about refugees internally displaced. So it's important, as you did, to remind that you also have people who remain in their country. What does a refugee, what is the plight of a refugee? The plight of a refugee is somebody who crosses a border. I can think of a Sudanese arriving in Chad. You lose everything. You may have been a medical doctor. You may have been an engineer. You may have been a nurse. You may have been a farmer. You suddenly cross into a country, you've lost everything. In some situation, part of the family could not make it. You arrive in a country and you have nothing. And you need to have the assistance of the people who are receiving you, the country which is receiving you, which is giving you asylum, the host population that is providing you with shelter, ourselves with the help of our partners, supporting the government in providing you with humanitarian assistance. What we're saying is, you do that, and then what? Do you continue to provide humanitarian assistance forever? Or do you try and invest in a manner that this person at some point will be able to resume a normal life until he or she can go back to his place of origin? So that's where we are now. And that's why development actors are essential. And that's why we've been working more and more with development actors beyond the humanitarian actors that we've been working with for such a long time.
And then there is a lack of funding, as I understand. We touched upon that briefly. But how big is the gap of funding, and how important is that to address the deficit?
The gap is very serious. The reduction that we've had as an organization from 2024 to 2026 is about, in terms of resources available, it's about 30% reduction in terms of resources available, with needs which stay roughly the same as we discussed earlier. So that's a very serious situation that we have. So we need to find additional sources of funding for humanitarian response. And we need to accelerate what I described, which is to ensure that anybody who does not need humanitarian assistance, but with some aid could become self-reliant, that this person is supported and assisted, so that you reduce the number of people for whom you need to mobilize on a regular basis humanitarian assistance. And then, of course, at the end of the day, if we try that, but conflicts continue and are not resolved, it's an endless pit. You just continue to try and look for resources for working on peace, ensuring that Security Council, other organs at regional level act to make sure that conflicts are resolved so that people can go back to their place of origin and that we avoid that new conflict result in additional displacement.
Finally, we're talking about an era where we live in that has been seeing intensified geopolitical rivalries, political and economic fragmentation. There seems to be no end in sight when it comes to these trends where fragmentation looks set to continue. And what would that mean? If so, what would that mean to the future of your work?
I want to be optimistic, and that's why I will say that who would have known 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that the Syria crisis would come to an end and that we will start seeing Syrians being able to go back to their place of origin. So it's possible if the right actions are put in place, for crisis to come to an end and for people to be able to return to their place of origin. So that's what I think should happen, and that's what we call for each of the refugee situations that we have around the world. The Sudan situation being the worst, more than 14 million people displaced internally and in neighboring countries. To call on actors in the international community to bring peace to this country, to help bring peace to this country, so that refugees can go back to their place of origin, internally displaced person can go back to their place of origin, and the country can resume a normal life. That's what we are calling for. In the meantime, we try to support asylum countries, but we know that the best answer to all this crisis is actually peace.
Assistant High Commissioner for Operations at UNHCR, Mr. Mazou, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that will do it for this edition of The Hub. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Wang Guan. See you again next time.